Oh, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, they can't fit. Just, the base can't fit somehow. Because that's the closest business. I guess if there was maybe because our kids, they gotta be together somewhere.
And I'll get their scripts at 10. Well, you said it's starting at 9.
Call the regular scheduled meeting of the DeWitt Public School Board of Trustees to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
One motion I will move today. Mr. Stoddard is absent, so we will need to appoint an acting secretary. So I do move to appoint Lisa Trescott as acting secretary for tonight's meeting.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Lisa, can you please take the roll call?
Yes. Angelina Burns. Present. Dwight Hansfeld.
Present.
Jason Hanselman. Brad Stoddard. Tom Tramontana.
Here.
Lisa Trescott. Here. And Brad Beaver.
Here. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Support.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Have an agenda. First item on the agenda is a presentation for our annual audit presentation by Flint Randy LLC. We will welcome Tiffany Stacy. Welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? All right. Thank you for having me tonight. The 2022 audit was a great audit, as always. I think this is the first board presentation that we are doing for our school season. And I think DeWitt's financial statements were the first set of financial statements we issued as a firm. So I do want to thank Rob and his team for being responsive, being able to close the books so quickly. I'm really not aware of another district that can pull that off so quickly, especially with all the federal funding that's going around right now. That's a big undertaking, so thank you, Rob. So the board packet that you received has 4 documents in it. It has the audited financial statements. It has the federal awards, the single audit. It has a letter to the board, which is the result of the audit. And then it has this graph presentation. So I'm going to focus on the graph presentation, but I did want to show just one thing in the federal awards audit. The very last page of the financial statements in the federal awards is kind of a good summary of the results of the audit. And it includes the basic financial statement results, which say that we have encountered no findings and there are no internal control deficiencies identified. And then the same thing for the federal awards audit. It also lists what federal program we tested as part of the single audit, which was the child nutrition cluster. And then it also includes a section that asks about a low-risk auditee status. And you will see that DeWitt is marked no in this section. And the only reason that DeWitt is a no as a low-risk auditee is a low-risk auditee requires 2 years history of a single audit. And this is only the second time in about 10 years, I think, that DeWitt has had a single audit. And it's really that COVID funding that pushed DeWitt over the threshold last year. So after this year, so next year's single audit, you will have 2 years under your belt of a single audit and you will have that low-risk auditee status. Really the primary difference when you have that designation is the coverage requirement for single audits. So if you're not a low-risk auditee, we have to test at least 40% of the federal expenditures. If you are a low-risk auditee, we test 20%. So that is the biggest difference there. So the rest of the presentation will focus on this board presentation, graph presentation. And this really does a good job of summarizing all those documents that are included in your packets. So this slide here, actually the next few slides, talk about the required communications under 8260. So this would be a summary of the information included in that letter to the board. We are here to report that we are issuing an unmodified or clean opinion on the financial statements of the district, which is the highest level of assurance that we can give as auditors on a set of financial statements. We did complete our audit in accordance with the planned timing and scope letter that you received on July 28th, and our report date was August 19th, 2022. The significant accounting policies of the district are included in Note 2 to the financial statements. There is a new accounting policy this year. It's called GASB 87. It requires leases to be included on the full accrual statements, essentially. So there's not a huge impact on the fund level financial statements that you see most often in these board meetings. Just a classification of expenditure difference there. But on the full accrual statements, any leased assets and the related present value of those lease payments have to be reported as an asset and a corresponding liability. So essentially it's grossing up the balance sheet a little bit. So that would be the bus leases and the copier leases of the district. The financial statements also include significant estimates as it relates to the pension and other post-employment benefits under the NIPSR's pension and OPEB plans. Similar to prior years, those have been included in the financial statements. The next few slides, you're going to hear a lot of no's. No's are a good thing here. There were no difficulties encountered in performing the audit. There were no audit adjustments identified by us. There were no uncorrected audit adjustments. There were no disagreements with management and no internal control deficiencies noted. No significant findings or issues, no fraud or illegal acts identified, and no consultations with any other accountants that we are aware of. And as I mentioned before, the management representation letter was received on August 19th, and that is the date of the financial statements. We are issuing an unmodified opinion, as I mentioned before. The financial statements are still the responsibility of management. Plant Moran is responsible for rendering that opinion on the financial statements. So before I get into the details of the finances, are there any questions on those slides that are more qualitative in nature? No? So this slide presents the general fund assets and liabilities as of June 30, 2022. So assets of the district were about $11 million as of June 30, and they primarily consist of two primary categories. The receivables category, which is $5.6 million at year end, and that's primarily made up of July and August state aid payments that are received after the district's year end. And then cash and investments, pretty self-explanatory, but that's the next highest category at $5.3 million. Assets are down from last year, about $1.5 million, and the reason for that decrease is in the cash and investments category, and it's because the liabilities are also down. So anytime you pay off a liability, you obviously have a decrease in cash, or if you use deferred revenue, that's a use of cash. So we'll see that on the other side of this graph. The liabilities were about $4.9 million at year end, and they consist of primarily the accrued liabilities category, which would be July and August accrual for teacher contracts that are paid out after the district's year end, and also the state aid anticipation note, which is the short-term borrowing used to bridge state aid. It's that 1 year borrowing that's due in August of every year, very low interest rate. The balance at June 30, 2022 is less than it was at 2021 because there was less borrowing last year. The other decrease in liabilities, it's hard to see on this graph, it's in that other category, which is the gold category. That's $111,000 at June 30, 2022. That balance was $1.3 million last year because it included deferred revenue related to the state equalization funds that were received by the district that weren't spent as of last June, but were spent this year. So they were deferred revenue in cash last year. This year they were spent on eligible expenditures and reduced the cash balance, reduced the deferred revenue. The next slide shows general fund revenue, and this includes prior year for a comparison. So you'll see that revenue increased about $2.9 million, or about 9% from prior year. The federal sources are included in bold in the graph. The federal sources in the general fund are primarily the ESF grants. So those would be your ESSER dollars and EAR dollars, things like that. The remaining federal revenue that was received by the district is in the child nutrition program, which is in the food service fund, which isn't shown at this graph, but that was about 1.2 million. And as I mentioned before, that's the program we tested as part of the single audit, and there were no compliance findings noted. The state sources is in teal. That's the largest category of revenue, and that's really impacted by two primary things: the foundation allowance, which increased significantly from prior year, from $8,111 per pupil to $8,700 per pupil in 2022. The other thing that impacts the state sources would be the pupil count. There was a change in how the state determines the pupil count in 2022. It went back to the traditional formula of 90% the fall count and 10% the previous spring. Last year, it was a super blend formula as a result of COVID to try to smooth the effects of COVID. So there was a change in the count this year, which led to a decrease in pupil count of 58 students. But when you net those two factors together, you still saw an increase in state sources. The next two slides present general fund expenditures. So this one presents the expenditures by function. As expected, with an increase in revenue, the expenses are also up 2.7 million, or about 8.7%. This graph breaks them out by type. So 67% was instruction, 27% was support, and 6% to others. All of these are pretty consistent with prior year. The one thing I wanted to point out that you'll notice is when I mentioned the district adopted GASB 87, it changed the classification of those lease payments for the copiers and buses. So they were previously included in support services, and now they are in debt service expenditures. So you'll see a little bit of a flip in that support and other category. This also presents expenditures, same expenditure categories, just by object code on this slide versus function code on the previous slide. Again, very consistent with prior year. Salaries and fringes make up about 87% of total expenditures this year versus 85% in the previous year. And then that shift for the lease payments that I mentioned earlier, in this slide you'll see it between supplies and other, which is where it was last year, and then debt service, where those lease payments are recorded this year. Any questions on those before I get into?
I have one question. I don't know if it would be for you or for Rob. The instructional coaches, they're, I'm assuming, part of the instructional and not support.
The instructional coaches are actually in the support category.
They're in the support category. Okay. Thanks.
This slide here looks at DeWitt versus other schools in the area and the amount of money spent on operating expenses versus instruction. So this information is on a one-year lag. So this is as of June 30, 2021, because the data for 2022 is not yet available for the other schools. But DeWitt is clearly a leader in this category, always has been on this graph as long as I can remember. For every dollar the district spends, 71% or 71 cents of that dollar goes directly to instructional or classroom type expenditures. You can see some of the other districts along the bottom, and then the state average is 62%. So you're above that state average with that 71%. This graph takes a closer look at fund balance as a percentage of total expenditures, and then it compares it to the state average. The state average is that line above the bar graph. Over the past 5 years, you will see DeWitt has been trending upward. The state average has also been trending upward. State average as of last year was 19.3%. DeWitt was at 15.5% last year, up to 17.9% this year. And we do expect that state average to follow a similar trend and tick upward. When we break apart the 17.9% for 2022, 0.5% of the fund balance is in a non-spendable form, which would mean it's prepaid costs or inventory costs. 2% would be assigned, so that would be budgeted use of fund balance in the next fiscal year based on the adopted budget, or carryover projects for next year. And then the remaining balance of 15.4% is unassigned. This last slide compares the fund balance, which is on the modified accrual basis of accounting, to the statement of net position, which is on the full accrual basis of accounting. So you can see a big discrepancy between the fund level total, so this is all funds, not just general fund. So this is 14.5 million at June 30, 2022. And then the net position for the district is negative 39.7 million as of June 30, 2022. And the biggest difference between those two numbers is the addition of that pension and OPEB liability that I had mentioned before. All districts are required to report their share of that liability. I can give you the numbers. For 2022, the pension liability was 43.6 million and the OPEB liability was 2.8 million. So those are what's kind of shifting that fund level fund balance to a negative net position. On the fund level side, the only thing I wanted to point out, because we talked about the general fund already, which is the 6.1 million. The 6.9 million is in the 2022 capital projects fund. So that's where the bond proceeds of the 2022 bonds are sitting to be used on the 2022 bond projects in subsequent years. Any questions?
Questions for Tiffany?
Mine is about fund balance compared to, I mean, we're below the state average, but compared to other districts, are we kind of okay?
We're seeing similar trends. A lot of the districts that I see are just below that state average amount, but all ticking upward.
What is the recommended?
It really varies. There's no set percentage. It really varies district by district. A lot of districts will use 10 to 15% fund balance number, but you know, getting to that state average is a goal of a lot of districts as well. So,
Just for some historical context, too, Brad, the board, at least in my experience, has always prescribed for 15% fund balance.
so I just want to thank Rob again for being so prepared with the audit. It's nice to get it done off everyone's plate, and it is nice to get this board meeting out of the way before I go on maternity leave. So this is probably the only one I've done this year. So if you have any questions in the meantime, my contact information is here. Jamie Essemacher is the partner on the audit. You can also reach out to her if needed. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. And thank you, Rob, and your staff, too, for getting this all together so quickly. To be the first one done is pretty remarkable with everything you all have to do. So thank you again for all your hard work. That brings us to public communication for items found on the agenda. It's the practice of the Board of Education to permit persons in the audience to make statements concerning agenda items at this time. Please complete a public comment form and return to the board desk if you wish to speak or prefer to express a written comment. Public comment shall be limited to 3 minutes. No participant may speak more than once. Any? Or nothing for any agenda? Anything from anybody on the agenda? Close it. We'll move to the consent agenda. It is the recommendation by Superintendent Sean Spicker that the Board of Education approve, adopt, accept the following items for immediate implementation and appropriate action as presented. Approval of minutes of the regular meeting from August 8th, 2022, work session August 22nd, 2022, treasurer's report and bills for payment the month of August 22 that have been reviewed by the treasurer. Items for annual approval, including the 21-22 audit report prepared by Frank Moran, LLC. Professional hiring of Wendy Smith as a DeWitt Middle School science teacher and an out-of-state overnight field trip for DeWitt High School marching band competition in Toledo, Ohio. Do I have a motion? And moved and supported. Any discussion?
I have one question. On the out-of-state band trip, I noticed that if a student couldn't afford it, they would not, if they wouldn't participate in the trip. Is there any fund that's available that would help students in that situation?
So there were a couple of things. I did ask Mike Norman to put on there where parents could sponsor another student. So we have had some sponsorships or scholarships coming in. And I did tell him to let me know if there were students who were unable to go. We wanted to make sure we found some resources to happen.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that too?
Yeah.
So Mr. Norman did give an update today on the number of sponsorships that we have for kids who couldn't go. As a band parent group, we were critically concerned that, if there was anyone who couldn't afford it. We are, I think, 6 away from having sponsored everybody who couldn't possibly afford it, not only this trip, but also our future parent support and contributions to sponsor the kids and we're going to do all that.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? I was gonna ask that question after. Oh, but I'll take it.
Oh,
Is
okay.
it-
I'm sorry.
Yes, Wendy, you're in the audience?
Yeah.
Yes? Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And
Yeah, I was a teacher and I retired because of COVID and things like that. And they opened up the opportunity to come back to teaching and I wasn't ready to retire. It was a very short decision and it's a short decision coming back too. So I'm really excited to be back. It's been a great couple of weeks and I'm glad to be back in the classroom again.
Well, we're happy to have you. Welcome. And congratulations. Thank you. All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, consent agenda passes. Okay, on to action items. It is the recommendation by Superintendent Sean Spiger that the Board of Education approve the generous donations of $600 from Kingsley Insurance Group for the Welcome Back staff meals. A thank you letter will be sent from the board. So thank you, Kingsley, for taking care of that for all of our staff. We have a motion.
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, on to public communications for any topic, including items not found on the agenda. It's a practice of the Board of Education to permit persons in the audience to make statements concerning items not listed on the agenda at this time. Mr. Prescott.
Yes, Jim Brenner.
Thank you. And congratulations. It's always good to successfully survive an audit. And it's good for the taxpayers. It's 72 cents of every dollar goes to instruction. That's an achievement. Thank you. I was talking last time, ran out of time, okay, concerning the radicalization of the teachers union and calling into question the convention that the NEA had in Chicago in July and some of the initiatives that they were sponsoring. And I have not seen the results of the voting. I'm not a member, honestly. But I do think the board, the superintendent should be aware of some of these, if you're not already. So I'm just highlighting the more interesting ones. New business item 41, the NEA will take all measures and steps to defeat, overturn the Don't Say Gay law in Florida. There is no such thing. In addition, why is the union doing that? The union, why are they spending money to do that? Okay. Keeping in mind the MEA is an affiliate. And those of you, I do have 30 years of labor industrial relations, both union, non-union, international as well as national organizations. So I'm fully aware of the relationship between an affiliate and the international. NBI 3053, create a policy task force to develop strategies for placing intersectionality, that's a CRT term, of climate justice and environmental racism, CRT term. Why in the world is a labor union that teaches students interested in passing this? How is it going to work? And new business item 63. NEA will inform states and locals of the following sample language that may be put in contracts. Parental leave instead of maternity leave, parent instead of mother or father, birthing parent instead of mother, non-birthing parent instead of father. And it's interesting because they're using this language so that you don't alert the Board of Education or solicitors as far as maternity leave, and so it'd be a more inclusive term. They're bypassing traditional values, okay? In addition, there are other things that they are sponsoring. Young people's right to learn about and develop their own sexual orientation and gender identity. What in the world are teachers involved in and a union get involved in of this sort? In addition, this is an interesting one. They want to spend $140,000 on researching the largest 25 organizations that are actively working to diminish a student's right to honesty and education, freedom of sexual individual autonomy.
Mr. Runner, you're over the 10 minutes.
Thank you, Lisa. One question. Is this a union that you support as members of this board? If it is, you better understand what they do. Thank you.
Theo Randall?
Hi guys, good evening. It's been a while. Theo Randall. I think I came before you last December advocating for the DeWitt archery program. The team at the club, the people involved, and the kids in general, or why I was here. But I'm here tonight. I would love to help better educate the entire community on NASP. NASP is the founding program on which the archery program runs. It is National Archery in the School program, and the way that it runs is the schools adopt the program, they get teachers certified, they teach it in the classroom, they put it in a curriculum so all kids have an opportunity to learn archery. And until that really happens here, the entire program is at a standstill. So last year I signed a letter with the principal at the middle school, other coaches signed letters with the principal at the high school. Nothing really transpired because of the confusion. A lot of it probably had to do with COVID-related issues, but in general, for this program to be successful here at DeWitt, we need to ensure that children, that they have an opportunity to learn this as a curriculum, whether it's in gym, math, history, whatever it can be taught at, as long as the teacher's certified. And then the schools have so many hours, like 10 hours minimum per year, per school, for these kids to have an opportunity to do this. And without that, the whole program is really, again, at a standstill. We can go back and forth between the clubs, between the parents, between whatever we have in the community, but ultimately it's up to you guys to adopt this into a curriculum, get teachers certified, and these kids have an opportunity to learn an amazing sport, technique, lifelong adventure with archery. The other issue, the club, I'd like to maybe address that next meeting. But right now, at least put this into a program. I would love to invite the state director, her name is Kathy Garland, have her come here with her team. She is the state director for the DNR. I personally got certified through her in Detroit at her class. I'd love to have her come here and really educate you guys on how this benefits not only the kids, but the community also. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Theo. Michaela Smith.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Michaela Smith. I am a taxpayer of DeWitt Township. So this evening I want to talk about how actions speak louder than words. If this school board truly values the community, the parents, the taxpayers, the voters, then the right thing to do is to reinstate the time duration for public comments. Historically, as we're all aware, public comments were given 5 minutes per person on agenda-related topics, and then 5 minutes for non-agenda-related topics. The current school board reduced and restricted public comments to 3 minutes per person per topic, and this policy change was voted on last November. So I'm using my measly 3 minutes to ask the current school board to have their actions speak louder than their words and place value back into the community by extending our public comment time to 5 minutes, which is also in alignment with how other local boards conduct their business. Thank you.
Thank you. Melanie Knapp.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you. My husband and I have lived in DeWitt Township for the past 24 years. We came as empty nesters, our daughter having graduated from Lansing schools when we lived in the city. We've always been and remain enthusiastic supporters of public education. We've supported every school millage since we've lived in the township. We hosted a foreign exchange student several years ago, and our experience with DeWitt schools was unequivocally positive. I come tonight as a concerned community member. There's an election coming up on November 8th, and 3 candidates will be selected to serve on this board. Why am I concerned, you might ask? I'm troubled because I've recently become aware of an effort across several local school districts to polarize board meetings and board races. When I heard that something similar might be happening in DeWitt, I took the time to go online and view some of your archived meetings. I was frankly dismayed by some of what I saw. I heard public comment on all the hot button issues I read about that are creating havoc at local schools across Michigan and across the nation. Critical race theory, anti-masking, parental freedom, and enhancing transparency, to name a few. Frankly, I was quite alarmed that these issues figured so prominently in public comment. I was prompted to look more carefully into what seems to be driving this trend. I learned that Moms for Liberty, a controversial national organization created to support parental rights in public schools, has a chapter in Clinton County. Perhaps you know the group. They are the force behind those signs that read, "We don't co-parent with the government." I read about how Moms for Liberty has sowed division among parents and made it harder for schools to educate students while keeping them safe. And I know this group is in our community because I've seen the signs in my own subdivision. So that's what brings me to talk with you tonight. The upcoming election in November is vitally important for many reasons, not the least for the consequences that it may hold for the school district. It's far too difficult to find out information about candidates for the school board. The flyers they put out sound innocuous, but what does enhancing transparency really mean? What I'm asking is that every effort be made to have a community forum where we can hear all of the candidates talk about their platforms and where we can ask questions. Let's do that to ensure that DeWitt can live up to its vision of equipping students to build a better tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jim Solz.
Good evening, thank you. I'll be short. Basically, I'm just asking for some additional notification or reach out to parents when we have transportation delays. My daughter's a first grader at Shavy, and on the first day of school, they were 40 minutes delayed. And we found out by asking some of the other drivers who had gotten on the radio, eventually calling, and it was, there wasn't a clear communication out to parents. We've had another day since where it's been 20 minutes late, and it's the beginning of school. I get it. There's going to be, equipment breakdowns. There's going to be all sorts of things. But I would just ask if we can leverage the existing texting system or some other system to be able to communicate out to parents if buses are running, say, more than 10, 15 minutes late. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other public comment before we close it?
Shona, it's my understanding that the NAS program is currently part of our.
Yeah, I was going to address that. in my,
Okay, I just had questions about that because I thought we had a contract. So,
Okay, hearing no more public communications, we will close public communications for this evening. We'll move on to the superintendent's report.
So I know the district doesn't sponsor particular, but I believe, I just want to address the concern about forum. I think tomorrow night and Wednesday night, there are interviews that DEA is doing, is that correct?
Yes, we've
And-
already had one, and then we have 2 more coming up.
Okay, and so those are Tuesday and Wednesday, are those public or?
Those are not, but we have in the past done a public.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, Sarah's right there, sorry, Sarah.
Well, and I usually don't do that, but we have a question, and I don't necessarily have all the information, so.
We are not posting a public forum for all the candidates.
Okay, gotcha.
In the past, the PTA has done that before.
So you're doing more for,
a screening and recommendation.
okay.
But there are public organizations who've done that in the past, but as a local, we're not.
Okay, so I think they're going to put out recommendations, but not, it's not an open forum.
I don't know anybody specifically on the PTA, but that is
Something they've done in the past.
it's been a great experience. I know for candidates.
So, at the elementary, you probably know who the president president of that is, if she wanted to reach out, no?
Not right up.
I can get that for you. Oh, there you go.
I did send some information to Angela. I don't have personally have the bandwidth with my other PTA role.
Right.
But I did send a guideline to Angela. I haven't replied back to her because I think she was willing to consider putting it together. I just haven't replied.
Thank you. And then also, because I have a long update, I just wanted to comment on the masks. So the middle school and high school are committed to making sure that we do our 10 hours so our students can participate in those events. So back to school, students and staff are getting into the routines. It's been a great start. Students are doing really well, and we had a successful our first community night, and I just wanted to make sure that I thank Mike, our athletic director, again for his vision in making that happen. I have some strategic plan updates for you all. So it has, as far as communication is concerned, we have had great efforts in our public relations, social media outreach, building and department websites and communication. I am so very grateful and impressed with our social media liaisons, and hopefully you've seen an update in all the great things that are happening around the district. We are working on interest for an appointment of student or student liaisons that will be working with the high school principal as well as the high school liaison. So we are still working on that aspect as well. Safety and operations, we shared out our training plan with staff at opening week for safety training for this year. The safety task force has met and has reviewed our action plans for the year. The cabinet did a reunification training scenario, and we will be sending out communication to parents on if there is a reunification or alternative location for any incidents that happen on campus. I met with both the chiefs, so Chief Ferguson and also the new Chief Maroney, who is of the township, to finalize our training for the 16th. So this Friday we are having safety training for all staff. And then we've also worked through the logistics of our active shooter training drill practice on October 21st. So the buildings will be closed to the community members during those, and I'll send out communication on which buildings and what time. So we'll be closed for those trainings to take place. We have stocked our to-go bags and have ordered tourniquets. So this was something that we're very lucky that both Chief Ferguson and Chief Maroney are ABI trained, and then also Chief Maroney actually comes trained with a lot of FBI training, and mentioned that tourniquets would be a good thing for us to include in our to-go bags. So we have secured the resources to make sure that all of our go bags are stocked with those. And the last thing under building operations is our building substitutes have been secured by each of the buildings to help keep some consistency there for our students when staff are out. The student board rep, the application and process, we're seeking interest this week, so hopefully by the next meeting we'll have an actual student representative on here as well.
Can I ask you a question? Did you change that this year to ask them to express interest versus just being?
It's a little bit different of a process as far as kind of expressing interest and then kind of meeting with the candidates to make sure that this is something that they're.
I'm so happy about that. Yeah, thank you. That's great.
So the student or students that we bring to you will be kind of well versed in what the expectations are and their role. So our enrollment preliminary numbers are 3116, which is one down from the blended count from last year. We have included in that count 38 school of choice students and 27 tuition students at the high school. Updates for the benchmark goals. So we have the same requirements as last year as far as establishing benchmark goals for K-8 students in both ELA and math, and then report out on those benchmark data at both in February at mid-mark and then at June. So we are keeping the same goals from last year to this year, and those will be reviewed at the curriculum meeting this Wednesday. With the target of 80% proficiency in ELA and math in the next 2 years. And that document will be posted on our transparency page for tomorrow. We also included that in the board packet. That should look very similar to last year's goals except for the date changes. As far as bond updates, the bond committee went through page turns for Herberson Woods and the transportation building this last week. We've updated our communication and added HVAC information and a timeline on our bond website, and we should have a new dashboard coming out this week that we will be able to post as well. And then at October's presentation will be a bond presentation, and they'll be able to update you basically from the last presentation to this presentation, the work that we've been doing and what's projected to come. And that's all I got.
Any questions for Dr. Switzer? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Okay, moved and supported. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any